What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 12 top 36 wide receiver rankings. Already posted the running backs earlier today, talking about the wideouts here, and looking at tier 1. These are going to be your locked-in high-end wide receiver ones. The studs you're going to start every single week. We've got Puka Nacua, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Rashee Rice, and CeeDee Lamb. Now, moving into tier 2, starting it off with Nico Collins, and he kind of had a slower start to the season. Wasn't looking like he was going to pan out at his preseason ADP in like that 1-2 turn area, but he's really turning it around. And like specifically with Davis Mills at quarterback, his last two games have been his best two fantasy performances: 7 for 136 and then 9 for 92 and a touchdown. Stroud is still not practicing. I'm not ready to make the case that like Davis Mills is just like straight up better for him for fantasy, but I do hope this is something we see continue his production, the volume when CJ Stroud is back in the lineup. But either way, I think he's a strong wide receiver one play. Then I've got T. Higgins going up against the Patriots. Now, this could be a tough matchup going up against Christian Gonzalez, who's one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. But I also just feel like with Jamar Chase suspended, I know he appealed it. I do expect it to get upheld. Like T. Higgins is going to be the clear-cut number one target. I think there's going to be a lot of volume out there, very likely a trailing game script. Even across from a really tough corner, I still think he is a wide receiver one play this week. Then I've got George Pickens going up against the Eagles. Pickens coming off a monster Monday Night Football game. There was the weird like first drive benching with him and CeeDee Lamb or like punishment. He still goes out there, catches 9 passes for 144 yards and a touchdown. Even with CeeDee Lamb back, he's averaging 17.6 PPR points per game, like I think in the 4-game sample since Lamb has returned. So Pickens, still a stud. He is my wide receiver 8 this week. Then I've got a Mecca Egbuka going up against the Rams. Coming off the bye week, he had the big like 20-plus point game. Came back down to earth a little bit in week 11, 9 PPR points. The volume is still there. I'm expecting a fairly pass-heavy game script against the Eagles. Still someone who I like in like that back-end wide receiver one range. In that same matchup, I have Devontae Adams going up against the Bucks. And week 11, like a rare down game for him this season. The targets were there with 8, but he caught 1 pass for 1 yard and a touchdown. So like the 1 touchdown did kind of save him, but outside of that, pretty much nothing going on. He's been awesome. I'm not fading him because of one weird game. And then the last guy in this tier, Chris Olave going up against the Falcons. On the season, Chris Olave is the wide receiver 12 in points per game. Tyler Shuck has like looked pretty solid since taking over in his 2 starts. And then with Rashid Shaheed gone, it just really feels like the targets are going to be so concentrated between Chris Olave and Juwan Johnson. I like him in like this fringe wide receiver one area. Now moving into tier 3, starting it off with Michael Pittman. He has been the wide receiver 11 in points per game so far. He's been super solid. Didn't have a great game in week 10 pre-bye week, but prior to that, he had like 3 straight games with at least 20 PPR points. So I think he keeps it rolling here against the Chiefs. Then I've got Devonta Smith going up against the Cowboys. Really nice matchup here. Cowboys allowing the 3rd most points per game to the wide receiver position. Smith really didn't do anything in week 11, 5 targets, 1 reception for 8 yards. But I do think this is a really nice get right spot here against the Cowboys. Then someone who's been super disappointing, Justin Jefferson. You drafted him to be a high-end wide receiver 1. He has not even come close to that. He's also got a fairly tough matchup against the Packers. And we have seen since J.J. McCarthy has come back in, gotten healthy, Justin Jefferson is averaging 11.8 PPR points per game. The volume is there, like he's still averaging 10 targets per game. But in his last 3, he has caught 15 total passes for 145 yards and a touchdown. Like that should be a boom game for Justin Jefferson. And that's what we've seen as his totals in the last 3 weeks. And I kind of came into this like rankings video when I sat down to actually rank these players. I thought I was going to have him a lot lower than this. Like, all right, this is officially time. We really kind of drop him. But then you look at the wide receiver position and with bye weeks, injuries, suspensions, like the wide receiver position is really sketchy. Even getting into like the back end wide receiver 2s, you're like, man, these are not names you would have thought you'd been ranking, coming into the season. And so like the volume's still there. And even though he's been really disappointing, like 11.8 points per game in a 3-game sample isn't the worst thing in the world. Obviously, it's way less than what you expected coming into the season, but I still think it's fair to have him ranked as like a higher end wide receiver 2 play. After Jefferson, someone who's kind of on an opposite trajectory, we have Jamison Williams, who looked really rough early on in the season. Things were not going well. All of a sudden, things are definitely trending up for him. First off, you have the Sam Laporta injury with him going on IR. All of a sudden, that takes, one of their top three targets just completely out of the mix. This is a team that has really kind of spread the ball around. You've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, super involved out of the backfield. It's unlikely that like all four of those dudes are putting up great receiving numbers week to week. You take one of those top guys out of the mix, Jamison Williams is going to have a higher weekly floor. And then in the two games with Dan Campbell taking over play calling, Jamos had two big performances, 6 for 119 and a touchdown, and then 4 for 88 and a touchdown. And then in this week, he draws a great matchup against the Giants, 6th in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. So a great spot here for Jamo. Feel very good about him moving forward. Then we've got my guy, Tetairoa McMillan. Super excited to talk about him in this video. He is going up against the 49ers this week, and I'd kind of felt like a broken record talking about Tet, where every week it was like, he's a great player. I think he is a very, very good NFL wide receiver. He's just not in a great offensive situation, and Bryce Young just straight up wasn't playing well enough to kind of support him as a top fantasy weapon. So I was very confident in the talent, but in terms of like his fantasy upside, he just hadn't really been there. He goes out in week 11 and really stamps like his first big time, huge boom game. 12 targets, 8 receptions for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. Bryce Young has had some issues getting over 200 passing yards this season. He throws for over 400. Great performance from Bryce Young. Tetairoa McMillan delivers with a monster game. And then he gets a really nice matchup here against the 49ers, who are top 5 in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. So it's very possible we see a really strong close to the season here out of Tetairoa McMillan, and I would be super excited to see that. After Tet, I've got A.J. Brown going up against the Cowboys. And despite all the drama surrounding the Eagles and this offense being pretty disappointing, over the last 4 weeks, A.J. Brown has been pretty solid. 14, 28.1, 3.3, and 11.9 PPR points. It's a great matchup here against the Cowboys. They're allowing the 3rd most points per game to the wide receiver position. And throughout the season, I'd been very optimistic about A.J. Brown kind of turning things around. He had been so consistently good, one of the most efficient wide receivers in the NFL year after year. And it seemed like the Eagles, even despite some of the struggles in previous seasons, they'd always kind of managed to get it together. And so I just thought eventually, right, A.J. Brown would put it together, this offense would click, and he would be a really strong fantasy option. I'm starting to potentially think that A.J. Brown is probably slipping as a player at least a little bit, and maybe that's part of the frustration, right? That he's just like not the same guy he has been in the past. Now, I still think he's a very, very good wide receiver, but I don't think he's someone who's going to be getting to like fantasy wide receiver 1 week to week moving forward. But in a great matchup, I'm fine with him as like a mid-tier wide receiver 2 play, but I probably do prefer Devonta Smith rest of season, which isn't really something I thought I'd be thinking, heading into this year. A few more guys in this tier. Zay Flowers going up against the Jets. The man's been super consistent, 60 plus receiving yards in 8 of his 10 games this season. He just cannot find the end zone. He has 1 touchdown on the year, and that was week 1. So he's just been allergic to getting into the end zone. It's a high scoring offense. They're way up there in terms of projected points this week. Hopefully he gets some positive touchdown regression. Then I've got Rome Odunze. Been pretty underwhelming over the last 6 games. Under 7 PPR points in 4 of his last 6. But on paper, this is a great matchup against the Steelers. They're allowing the most points per game to the wide receiver position, so potential bounce back opportunity here for Rome Odunze. And then the last guy in this tier, Stephon Diggs going up against the Bengals. I like the matchup. He's coming off a really impressive week 11, 11 targets, 9 receptions for 105 receiving yards. He scored at least 10 PPR points in each of his last 5 games, and he's kind of gotten to that number in different ways. Certain matchups like this past week, it's just a big overall receiving day. The volume's there. In some other games, he hasn't necessarily been hitting in the yardage department, but he's been getting into the end zone. I expect the Patriots to put up points here. They are tied for 3rd in implied points. So Stephon Diggs, nice mid to back end wide receiver 2 play. Now moving into tier 4, this is where things start to feel a little bit sketchy. Guys that you don't feel like super excited to plug into your lineup. And I'm going to start off this tier with Marvin Harrison Jr. going up against the Jaguars. And I'm not going to be ranking Michael Wilson, but I am going to talk about him kind of in this section with Marv. So he misses the week 11 game with, I think it was like surgery for appendicitis. With what I've seen, typically players miss like 1 to 2 games with that. So it's very possible that Marv returns in week 11. And you might be thinking, like, why would you have Marv ranked here ahead of Michael Wilson, who just had that monster game? To be honest, like, yeah, it was a huge game for Michael Wilson. The man hadn't scored double-digit PPR points the entire season until week 11. So I don't think magically, if Marv's back in the lineup, Michael Wilson is all of a sudden going to be like some fantasy monster and someone you want to trust. However, if Marvin Harrison Jr. is out, then I certainly could see the case for Michael Wilson being in like this tier 4, tier 5 area as like the top, number 1 wide receiver in this offense. But for Marv specifically, if he is back in the lineup, he's had a few decent games with Brissett. The passing volume has been there, like over 42 pass attempts per game with Brissett as the starter. So I do like Marv as a back-end wide receiver 2 if he can get back on the field this week. Wide receiver 22, Wan'Dale Robinson going up against the Lions. In his last 5 games, he's averaging 12.6 PPR points per game on 9 targets a game. Decently high floor, just given his weekly volume, but not the highest weekly upside guy. Then I've got Alec Pierce, and I'm officially done sleeping on Alec Pierce. I had been, pretty out on him throughout the season. He had been stacking some solid performances. I wasn't really buying into it. I'm buying in here on Alec Pierce. He's commanding volume. He still has the big play upside. Since week 2, he's averaging 12.6 PPR points per game, and that's without hitting in the touchdown department. Only 1 touchdown on the season. And then in his last 4 games, he's been targeted 35 total times, and he's averaging 14.9 PPR points per game. So, he is a legitimately good wide receiver. I think people are going to be shocked with how much money he gets paid potentially in free agency or if he re-ups with the Colts. But someone who I do trust in this back end, fringe wide receiver 2 range. And then the final guy in this tier, Juwan Jennings, going up against the Panthers. He's been very solid over his last 3 games, 4 for 41 and a touchdown, 6 for 71, and then 4 for 54. We'll see what the wide receiver usage looks like moving forward. Ricky Pearsall, talk about him in a few players, obviously didn't have a big game in his return, but I do think he still will be a factor rest of season. And then looking at tier 5, I'm starting it off with Brian Thomas Jr. There's no guarantee he plays this week, but he was practicing last week as a limited participant, dealing with that ankle injury. He's been underwhelming. He's been a guy who hasn't shown that he plays through injuries very well, but still a talented player. This team needs weapons. I think high-end wide receiver 3 is a fine spot, especially when, you hear some of these other names. It's not necessarily world beaters remaining in these rankings. The next guy is Khalil Shakir, coming off a disastrous week 11, 1 reception for -3 yards. If you're playing in standard scoring, he literally got you negative points. It's also a tough matchup here against the Texans, 2nd fewest points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. However, Shakir has been someone who's had a pretty high weekly floor, not totally fading him because of one, rough performance in week 11. After him, I've got Romeo Doubs going up against the Vikings. Doubs has just been solid, 9+ PPR points in 6 of his last 7 games. I don't think he's a crazy talented wide receiver. This passing attack has not been great, but he's a fine wide receiver 3 at this point in the season. Then I've got Ricky Pearsall. Mentioned him a few players ago. Week 11, the routes were there, 82% route participation. He was back on the field. He was getting his routes, but he caught 1 total pass for 0 yards. So standard scoring, 0 points if you started Ricky Pearsall. But in the first 4 games, I do think he proved that he's a good wide receiver. He can produce in this offense. Averaged 13.1 points per game in those first 4, and that was without getting into the end zone. So I think this 49ers offense is unique in that Shanahan can kind of scheme up where a lot of the targets are going. I think as Pearsall settles in, he's going to have some better games. And if your trade deadline hasn't passed, I think Pearsall is a very solid buy low, where the owner might just be super frustrated. He's been injured, hasn't been playing. When he's back, he doesn't do anything. I still think Pearsall could be a solid option rest of season. And then the last guy in this tier, DK Metcalf, going up against the Bears. He's just been brutal. Last 3 games, 10 receptions for 90 yards. He's someone who has really banked on efficiency and touchdowns, and those have just not shown up over the last couple of weeks. We'll also see what his quarterback situation is looking like. Aaron Rodgers could potentially miss time. Mason Rudolph would be the new starter there. And then moving into the sixth and final tier, this tier does kind of feel like just a crapshoot, a mixed bag. I'm going to start it off with Christian Watson going up against the Vikings. He does not have a high weekly floor. He's been back for 4 weeks coming off of IR, and he has not exceeded 5 targets in a game. His targets have been 4, 4, 4, and then 5 this past week. He is coming off a big fantasy day, 4 receptions for 46 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's averaging 11.8 PPR points per game. He's like a downfield big play threat, does have some touchdown upside. He has been pretty efficient with his targets, but not someone who I think is like, a guaranteed lock in your lineup. Then I've got Jacoby Myers going up against the Cardinals. We saw his usage increase in week 11, kind of was playing a part-time role in his first game with the Jaguars. The routes went up to 83% in week 11. I think even with BTJ back, I think he'll be getting starting routes still. I think Parker Washington is the guy that would take a hit there. And then he had a decent game, 6 targets, 5 receptions for 64 yards. Fine wide receiver 3 rest of season. Wide receiver 32, I've got Jordan Addison going up against the Packers. He's just been brutal with J.J. McCarthy. McCarthy's been rough. Addison has not been good. I will say he caught a touchdown in this game, but he also had a couple of bad drops. It's just been a combination of McCarthy's not playing well. When he does make good throws, the receivers aren't helping him out. So just a disaster, all across the board. But he's averaging 8.3 points per game with McCarthy. In those 3 games, he has caught 7 total passes for 103 yards and a touchdown. That's just not getting it done. Then I've got Tez Johnson going up against the Rams. His first really bad game since breaking out as a starter on this team. 3 targets, 1 reception for 6 yards, 3 carries for 0 total yards. But in his previous 5, he had been averaging 13.3 points per game. It's a very solid passing attack. Rams' run defense has been really tough, so I do think we could see the Bucs rack up a decent amount of passing volume in this matchup. Then at wide receiver 34, I've got Trey Tucker. I know some people really like Trey Tucker. I haven't been super in on him. Had a decent week 11, 8 targets, 4 receptions for 47 yards and a touchdown. Now, normally I'm not the guy who does this, right? You have some people that are like, well, if you remove all these big games this player had, or the new thing with Travion Henderson, if you remove his 2 long runs, this is actually what his yards per carry is. I'm not typically that guy. However, if you remove the Trey Tucker 40.9 PPR point game, he's averaging 9 points per game in the rest of those matchups. So I'm not saying that's fair, but his overall point per game number is heavily skewed based on that one boom game. That is not the same offense we're looking at this point in the season. So back end wide receiver 3, I think that's pretty reasonable at this point. Then I've got Darnell Mooney going up against the Saints. I mean, this Falcons team, they're in a bad spot. I mean, Drake London now week to week. Michael Penix likely done for the year. This is a team that traded away their 2026 first-round pick, which it was a terrible trade at the time. It has aged very, very poorly. The Rams are likely going to be getting a really high-end first-round pick in this upcoming class. But Darnell Mooney, been a major disappointment. Banged up heading into the season. Believe he broke his collarbone. That was just recently revealed from the preseason. But it's who else is Kirk Cousins going to throw the ball to aside from Kyle Pitts and now Darnell Mooney? In his last 2 games, he's been targeted 15 total times. He has only caught 4 of those for 51 yards. So you're hoping Mooney can just do something with those opportunities. And then the last 2 players in this tier, DJ Moore, Luther Burden, talking about both of these Bears wide receivers. I like this matchup like I talked about with Rome. First in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. DJ Moore has just been a non-factor in back-to-back weeks. And then Luther Burden finally took over those wide receiver 3 snaps. Didn't have a monster game, but fine overall performance. No one on the Bears, in terms of their pass catchers, really did anything all that crazy. So I think both of these dudes could be relevant in this matchup against the Steelers. And then that is going to wrap it up for my wideout rankings. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.